So I'm really pleased, as usual. We've got Claire. I'm going to do super fast intros. The secular Quranist, which means somebody who's not Muslim but thinks the Quran as a guidebook or a rule book for the West is really useful. And I've got AJ or Alavari, a good friend of mine from a Quran class, also not a Muslim, an atheist humanist who runs the Quran class, and I really like his interpretations of the Quran. So might as well both of you say hello so they can hear your voices or something. I don't know.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thanks,
Cool.
Scarlett, for having us.
Thank you for being here. Okay, so here's the format. These are marriage classes, people to get, the problem in the West in terms of people wanting to get married, people getting married, blah, 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 millions of things related to it, staying married as well. And I'm just going to, so I'm a Muslim. I didn't introduce myself. I would call myself a revolutionary kind of Muslim, the type that wants to change the world with love. And that's literally kind of our motto is love for all, hatred for none. But that's how we intend to change the world, with those kind of ideas. And so I'm going to quote a verse of the Quran, and then we've got 4 standard questions that we always cover. So I'll quickly read that verse of the Quran, and then I'll be asking our guests their opinions. So the question we've got today is, does God matter in marriage? This is class or episode 5. And the verse is, your wives are a tilth for you. So tilth is a farming word, which means a kind of a fertile ground, basically, well taken care of fertile ground. So the verse goes, your wives are a tilth for you, so approach your tilth when and how you like, and send ahead some good for yourselves, and fear Allah, that is God, and know that you shall meet him, and give good tidings to those who obey. That's Quran chapter 2. I would say chapter 2, verse 224, but a lot of people say 223, just because some weird counting thing. And then I'm going to jump into our first of our 4 questions and a reflection based on the verse I just said. So the first question is what is the nature and purpose of marriage? And I would say, based on that, those metaphors, something like this. So just as a fruit tree, might sound really weird, just as a fruit tree keeps reaping rewards for people, if you plant a fruit tree, reaps rewards for you in this life and the next, and you might say in the next. How? Because in Islam, if you can help, if something you do in this life, and even once you've passed away, keeps helping people, that's a reward for you. That's the same as your children. So the metaphor for essentially children are your seed that you grow through your wife. And it sounds really weird to people, okay, treating your wife like farmland, whatever, but people get too fixated on that particular part, but not on the purpose, the point of the metaphor, which is to grow something beautiful for the future. So your children are your seed. If you raise them well, you tend to them like you do plants really well, they will be good for you. In fact, they'll be good for not just you as a man, or but both of you and your spouse. Will be transformative for you, because like the act of tending to them is a journey in itself. It's rewarding in itself. You get so much from it. So because a Muslim thing is to go to your right, and the way I can see it is Claire is on my right. We'll go clockwise. Initial thoughts, Claire. What did you understand? Any of what I was talking about? Any thoughts?
Your question is what is marriage for? And I would just
Yes.
say for legitimate children. That's what it's for.
But what do you think about what I said? So for legitimate children, cool, and we'll go into that. But okay, if I was to summarize in a few words, I was saying to grow something beautiful and useful for a better future is another way of saying what I just said. What do you
And
think
then
about that?
I would affirm that for legitimate children who are a credit to their parents. That's what it's for.
Cool. And I'm going to dive into, because I know Claire for a long time. I know where her ideas are coming from based on statistics I'm aware of. So when you say legitimate children, the reason why you're focused on that is because, you can correct me, but statistically, if they're illegitimate, like children outside marriage, they're more likely to be criminals and things like that. Is that the reason why you're saying legitimate all the time, or is there another reason?
Well, yes. I mean, I think it's generally acknowledged that children who grow up in fatherless homes, brought up by their unmarried mothers, will be more likely to become the criminal classes and the convicted prisoners of the future, as well as the underachievers, producing more, illegitimate offspring and convicted prisoners, etc. It's a vicious cycle of degeneracy and decline, and the death of your civilization.
Cool. And so, AJ, feel free to disagree with us completely or whatever you want to say. I don't know if you've managed to see any of our shows, but we're very free and open and even encourage disagreement. Go for it, AJ. What are your thoughts about what I've said, and then your own thoughts about the point of marriage?
I haven't seen any of the live streams before, but that's my fault. I had been meaning to, but I like the free format, and certainly in the manner of our classes as well, our Quran classes that you mentioned, we do love the informal format. So I'm happy to be part of that. I would say the nature and purpose of marriage, coming from a humanist perspective and an atheist agnostic perspective, is we can see ourselves as parts of the natural world, the animal kingdom. Homo sapiens are known to form long-term partnerships. That's in our nature, it's in our genes. And I think that's, one part of that is for rearing children. There could be an argument as to whether those evolutionary forces are really at work freely now in the 21st century as they were in, human past, 10,000, 30,000 years ago, or even more than that, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when these evolutionary traits developed in us because we were hunter-gatherers or we needed to survive. But still, we have those brains that still fall in love, and most of us do look for long-term partnerships.
So would you say two things? So there's two things. What do you think about my idea of the point of marriage is to grow beautiful children for a better future? It's an effective way of creating
I would say
the world.
Just like big questions like the meaning of life, I don't think there's only one meaning. We talked about this last week, the problem of trying to be very reductionist and saying even one word can have one meaning. So let alone a concept like marriage, I don't think it's sensible to say that it has one point or only one point. Life doesn't have only one point. It has loads of aspects. So one aspect of it is, yes, evolutionarily and also morally and socially, having children and having two parents seems to be, at least it's part of our evolutionary history. But just because that's the way it's always been doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way it should be. And again, statistics, you have to be very careful.
When you say there's any, I'm trying to aim for this. So do you agree that, okay, so you might agree there might be that value. I'm just seeing if you disagree or agree with what my statement. Where would you fall on? Agree,
your statement about marriage
agree?
being growing children. Yeah, I agree. That's one aspect of marriage, but it's not the only aspect of marriage, because there are many
and I would
children
agree. Yeah, I think it's
single parent households, or people who are married but don't have kids. Marriage even in old age, for example, when there really is no interplay of kids because they're all grown up and left the house. 2 70-year-old people can live, without children being in that dynamic, and the marriage and that coupling can still be important.
Sure.
So are you okay about gay marriage?
Claire can ask questions. Go for it, Claire.
I mean, well, what about gay marriage? You cool with that?
Sure. Yeah, I think homosexuality is observed in the animal kingdom, in Homo sapiens, as well as many other species. So it should be very natural for humans to do it.
And do you intend to marry?
I wouldn't say I intend to marry, but I'm open to it. I go with the flow. If I meet someone that I really do value, and she also values the ritual of the marriage ceremony, sure. But equally, I could also see just cohabiting, or I could see other forms of commitment that don't involve. Of course, in marriage, we have to differentiate maybe in this discussion the legal form of marriage, signing a paper, versus maybe the spiritual, the religious, the moral commitment versus the ritual, i.e., having a marriage ceremony. Maybe we should differentiate between those three things because they're not all the same thing.
Okay. So what do you think about, I mean, based on like some of these, okay, so what do you think, Alavari, about the fact that people, I think, live either 12 to 14 years less, or men live 12 to 14 years less if they're not married?
Yeah, so I think statistics we have to be quite careful of. We mentioned before about broken homes and criminality. I've not seen this particular statistic that you're referring to about longer, life expectancy, but I can certainly believe that hypothetically for the purpose of this discussion. Sure, if we go with that, we have to look at very careful about social sciences. I mean, it's very, even in
Can
the
you
hard
imagine it's
sciences.
true as we're social beings?
I can imagine
we-
it's true. I can imagine it's true. I can imagine it's true. But we have to be very careful about drawing conclusions from social sciences. I mean, even in physics, even in theoretical physics, it's difficult to know anything for sure. There are trends, there are suggestions. So yes, if you're born in a broken home, I've seen some of the statistics that say, yes, you're more likely to end up in prison. And like you say, I can certainly imagine it's true of life expectancy. But are we sure that correlation equals causation? Could it not also be true that if you happen to be in a broken home or your dad, walks out, that is a correlator of also having other social problems, for example, growing up in a bad neighborhood, growing up in poverty, that also make you more likely to go to prison. And the sole factor of the dad not being at home can't be ascribed completely as a causation relationship. So I think we have to be careful.
What would it take you to accept that there is a correlation? 100% or 51% or 75%?
As I say, I think correlation, even if it is 100% correlation, cannot be mistaken for causation. I think that's a logical fallacy. For example, I can show you 100% correlation between, I don't know, me wearing this jacket and it raining outside. It could happen every day for the past year, but that doesn't mean it's causation because there's no logical mechanism by which my jacket is causing it to rain. So it's not I don't think it's a question of the threshold of correlation, 51%, 60%, etc.
Well, if you want to deny it, then you would deny it, right? Because
I think
you're cool with gay marriage and illegitimacy, and marriage is just a piece of paper, isn't it?
Sorry, no, I said there were
For
three.
you, it would be just a piece of paper.
I said there were three. So I said there were three aspects of marriage, and we shouldn't confuse the definitions. So when we say marriage, are we talking about the legal piece of paper? Are we talking about the marriage ceremony?
The legal, yes, of course, the legal. I mean, not the airy fairy. Oh, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and yes, of course, I'm talking about the legal aspect of it.
Okay, so is that this whole live stream, this whole discussion is only about the legal contract of marriage, not the religious aspect?
The essential nature of marriage is for sexual reproduction within wedlock. Yes, there will be, people who marry who don't have children and they stay married, but the teleological purpose of marriage is to have legitimate children.
Yeah, I would disagree. I think quite, as we said before, ascribing, we can't even say the meaning of life is only one thing. So why would we try to say that, marriage is only one thing?
Well, the meaning of life is up to the individual. It's up to the
Exactly.
individual to find his purpose. And some people never find their purpose. Particularly if humanists or atheists, they just sort of, wander around and, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and never make up their minds. And yes.
So I mean, I think I think we can prove there is a purpose, but I won't go into that yet. But and another point I probably should have made in the beginning, but the intro would have been too long, is that we're not going to like make somebody say yes, I agree with whatever. It's kind of like we'll go through a question, people share whatever. Okay, but I think an obvious question following on from what Claire was saying about legitimacy and statistics of criminality amongst children if they're not legitimate children, to Alavari, because me and Claire already agree, so I suppose might as well ask you, AJ. Do you think it's more responsible if you see a lot of statistics and there seem to be correlation? Okay, some sort of argument, you can't see a counter argument really. Okay, and it seems to be logical that legitimate children in a clearly defined marriage, call it legal, yeah, to make it simple, legal marriage. Um, wouldn't you say it's a responsible thing to do in society to have legitimate children?
So in that hypothetical world where
Yeah,
you can ascribe 100% correlation to causation, and where in that alternate universe where social sciences don't have this inherent ambiguity, in this universe they do have an inherent ambiguity. It's very difficult to, again, we can pick and choose the stats that we want and arrive at a conclusion. So in that alternate universe, sure, yeah, but I want to live in this universe, not in that one. So in
sure.
this universe,
When I,
it's
but what I
difficult to
meant by
ascribe those
responsible
causalities.
is like given the statistics and given like the likelihood, because we don't know anything for sure. So when you say likely, it's a probability word we're using, really.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of
So
social sciences are
based on
about
a
probability.
exactly, because we
Or
don't know anything for
science,
sure.
full stop,
So isn't
actually.
it the responsible thing to do, given the likelihood, to do the thing that makes society better, according to
Yes,
that?
exactly. And we've discussed this before. So, for example, offering, childcare, government-provided childcare that's free or very low cost, removing wealth inequality, sexual discrimination, other barriers to social progress. These things, I would say, are very, very good ideas. Not just encouraging marriage. I think there's other factors that play into the broken home that we use as an analogy, and the child of that broken home going on to be a criminal. It's not just the presence of a father. So for me, a logical way to approach it would be, here are the 10 things that could possibly influence that child. One of which, sure, could be the lack of a father in the household, but there's other things. And how much of those, what's the proportion that those other factors have into play, and how can we address those? That to me seems a logical way to approach it, rather than kind of jumping in and just saying, oh, let me just take marriage as kind of a hobby horse and ascribe fall of Western civilization, etc., to that. So that's how I would approach it.
Cool. I want to jump onto the main thing, which is the title of the show, which is what's the effect of God, right? So this is kind of still reflecting on the initial verse that I quoted, and if people have forgotten it, I always put the summary of whatever I'm saying in the description. So there's a document, just check it out. It'll be there even afterwards. Anyway, so and as in the answer to the second question that we always ask, which is how to be marriageable, and my thoughts on that is only the God-fearing will toil, using the kind of farming words, toil in growing such fruits, the fruits of good children. The godless, as statistics show, do not see the long-term benefits of marriage. Okay, when there is no God, there is no purpose, and so no will to do anything. This might be a bit of a strong generalization, but generally, psychologists know. There's Nietzsche and people like Viktor Frankl who talk about purpose. And if you think the world is random, there with no purpose, then is really you really struggle to do anything. And I'm seeing that with lots of people I talk to. It's like, oh, what's the point? What's the point of this? What's the point of that? Everything's ambiguous. What's the point of marriage? Whatever. There's no direction, but also there's not much motivation. And you might say you can have purpose without God, but I would say that's a logical fallacy in itself, in the sense that if you've already said there's no purpose, then you can't say you're going to carve out a purpose out of no purpose. That's a contradiction, fallacy, whatever you want to describe it as. You can't make a purpose when you've already said there is no purpose. So and then I'll talk about why you should believe in God afterwards when we go around as part of this same point, based on some of the thoughts in this particular verse I've quoted. But yeah, so to summarize, Claire, I'm saying fear of God and awareness of God, like God's commandments, is clearly the way to make marriage work. And the reason we know that is it's not just people who are religious, but really strictly religious, who are very aware that God says, don't have sex outside marriage, don't do this, you must get married, you must take care of your children, you must be responsible. Like in Islam, it's very clear, you must be responsible for your wife. There's all these black and white rules, and essentially the core of it is fear of God. What do you think? Is fear of God key to success in marriage? I suppose that's the question. What do you think, Claire?
Of course, I mean, only religious people feel they have to get married. Atheists don't see any point in it. It's just a piece of paper that they can throw away. As and when they lose that loving feeling, and they can move on to the next sex partner who's round the corner. I mean, there's the marriage vows that I think is not being said anymore. This. It used to be featured in lots of dramas and movies, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part, according to God's holy law, in the presence of God, I make this vow. And
wow, I love that. They don't say that anymore. Wow.
No, they don't say that.
Oh.
So, it's just, well, I love you until I lose that loving feeling, and then I'll move on to the next one until I'm too old to find a partner to have sex with me, I guess. That's how they're going to roll. And I guess they're going to be, they'll mostly end up dying childless and alone. And the problem will solve itself, you see, in a rapidly aging and shrinking society.
And I'm just going to clarify what Claire means by solve itself, is that the religious people will have children and their ideas will continue, and the irreligious people won't have children, which is what we're finding. This is statistically true. It's a massive population implosion is one of the biggest problems that governments are trying to solve. And it's no joke, like literally, like my cousins in Sweden, I will get to you, AJ, but I'm just clarifying some of the points.
No worries.
My cousins in Sweden get 1.5 years off work paid, I think at a rate of 70 or 80%, just to have children, for every child they have. Like, that's how desperate Western countries are. Not so much, I think, in England, maybe because we've got so many Muslims having loads of kids. So yeah, and just to make it more palatable, I think, just to add tiny, like, to push the point of fear of God. Fear of God doesn't sound like an exciting way to live your life. This is also a Christian idea. Fear of God is the root of all wisdom. Just to make the point is that human beings are really short-sighted. We're really short-sighted. We forget that we're going to die. We forget the big point of anything. And so fear of God is an awareness technique. It's like, we should know God exists, and we talk about why we should know God exists. And just the fear of God reminding us that God is always watching is actually really helpful. I find it really helpful for me to do long-term things and avoid stupid things. It helps me a lot. So those are my thoughts. So AJ, to put it as a question, do you need to know, be aware of God and have fear of God on top of that? Is it helpful to have a fear of God and awareness of God both together to get you married?
I'm not sure that it is. I mean, of course, we can talk about what we mean by God. I mean, it could be a very short conversation because, as you say, I'm an agnostic atheist. But going by Einstein's definition of God and Spinoza's definition, which, as you know, I have no problem using that term. Some atheists and humanists, many of them do have a problem with it, but I don't. You know, I'm a spiritual person in that sense. And even though I don't believe in the supernatural, I think there is the belief in something that unifies us, the cosmos, the power of nature, and just having that feeling of awe and humility in front of a magnificent universe. In that sense, that feeling of God, which Einstein talked about, I think could be useful. Could be useful in humbling oneself, making sacrifices, connecting with people, being a good person, having morals, sensing that we're part of something greater. And these traits tend to be what I look for in a partner, and what many people look for in a partner. So yes, that idea of
That's
being
interesting.
humble.
You actually look for a believer in God. What could you put that again? Like,
No,
you look
as
for a
someone
partner?
someone who has good personality traits in terms of their values, being willing to sacrifice themselves for something greater, for society. I think a lot of marriage and a lot of relationships are about compromise and sacrifice and being kind and generous. And I think whether you call it God or cosmos or the air or whatever you call it, I think a belief and an attraction towards that, towards unity, is, I think, what I would consider as the closest I feel towards believing in God. In that sense, I think, yes, having that belief does make you attractive. And I think that could help in finding a life partner. But just on the marriages question, I mean, you introduced me before as a humanist. I'm one of the national coordinators for Young Humanists UK, which is the youth wing of Humanists UK, which is the national charity in the UK that represents humanists. And our sister organization, Humanist Society Scotland, they conducted 9,400 humanist marriages last year, 2023, whenever the figures were, 10,000, 9,000. That was more than all of the faith-based marriages. So humanist celebrants, humanist weddings, and humanist funerals are one of the most common ways that the average person on the street who doesn't come to a Quran class or topical live stream like this may hear about humanism. So I would suggest that we look at the data and actually look at the reality and see that marriage rituals, marriage, the spiritual connection, the moral connection, and also marriage, the piece of paper, is very important to people who don't.
Are you saying marriage amongst humanists is more than religious people
in
the UK?
In 2022 or 2023, I can't remember the exact year, but there were more humanist marriages conducted by humanist celebrants with no God in the ceremony, no God in the relationship. That was more than all of the other faith-based and belief-based marriages, Muslim, Christian, etc., in Scotland in 1 year.
In Scotland, yeah. I
That's
do
right.
struggle to believe that, because the statistics are that Muslims tend to have more children. So we're 5% of us in the UK. Muslims are roughly 5%. The numbers keep changing a little bit. 5% of the population have 10% of the children. So maybe
I'm looking at it now. In 2022, 9,140. Sorry, not 9,400. 9,140 in 2022 were the humanist weddings, and all of the other weddings, Christian, whatever, all combined, were 8,000. It's in that National Records of Scotland website.
I struggle to believe that, but
we're talking about stats and picking and choosing, weren't we? But there's
no, but I struggle to believe it because my real world experience is, like, if I ask lots of atheists, they tend not to be married.
Yeah, and that's why we can't trust anecdotal evidence.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I mean, this is the whole point. We will have a conversation. People can check for themselves and things like that. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll post some comments in the comments or stats in the statistics or something.
I can. That's the link.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, you can post it in the. So have you sent it? Where have you sent it to me, in the WhatsApp or?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You can post it in the chat, live chat, if you like. Can you see that
live stream?
Live stream chat, but I can post it as well if you. Oh no, you haven't WhatsApped it to me. Where have you sent it? In the something else?
Okay, I put it in the chat of the live stream on YouTube.
Oh yeah, maybe links don't show or something. I think, is that right, Claire? I don't think links share. Maybe you can Maybe send it to me and I'll post it afterwards or something. I think there's some sort of restrictions on
Okay.
putting links or something.
Well, I see it in the private chat.
Oh, do you see in the private chat? I can't even see the private chat. Where is the private chat gone? Why? Oh, there it is. Sorry, looking in the wrong place. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to copy paste that. Copy and back to the normal comments. I haven't looked to the private chat for a long time, so I forgot where it was. Okay, so thanks, AJ, for that. Okay, cool. And then the obvious question is, well, if we're saying it's really important, and I would say it is, a lot of people, if you look at, I don't know, even places like Israel and whatever, it's quite, I think it's pretty well known that it's the ultra Orthodox Jews, for example, that have most of the children by far. So the question is, like, how do we know God exists? And I'm coming back to this verse of the Quran, which makes a lot of claims. It says, and you should fear God and and know that you shall meet him. And they're not just like, they're not, I don't think any verse of the Quran says things randomly, but I think they are in they're how do you say, statements made in order that logically follow. And this is my idea. First of all, belief in God is natural. Okay, what do I mean by that? Just like we don't deny the existence of a creator of your phone or your laptop or something like that, it's unnatural and massive leap of faith to deny God, a creator, an intelligence, especially if you have any idea of the the complexity of nature. Our eyes, even a drop of blood is absolutely impossible to exist, even if you had trillion what's it called, mutations per second since the beginning of the universe. It's just not possible. So belief in God is only natural, but the only reason why we don't believe in God, okay, is the lack of practice of fear of God, which is a practice. It's like meditation or something like that. You have to keep contemplating and have this awareness, which is built into you already through your conscience. Your conscience is, the Quran talks about the self-accusing soul. So that self-accusing soul is evidence that why would God build into you a program that says, look, you're being naughty, and again, every moment of your life? It's evidence of God and a judgment day that you're going to pay for at the end. So in short, belief in God is natural. And I'm going to put as a question to Claire and then AJ. Belief in God is natural, and a fear of God is a psychological tool that you should use for yourself as kind of like a reflection tool to stop yourself from being in denial of this obvious fact. Like if if you kept on reminding yourself, look, obviously there's a God, and from all my experiences, and I'm not going to try to kid myself to think otherwise, because I can get away with doing whatever I want. I'm going to employ this thing called fear of God. What do you think about this idea, Claire, that God is a natural belief and we should employ fear of God as a psychological tool to stop us from making bad choices and encourage good choices like marriage?
Clearly, the government should do this, but they don't, because they are, in my view, suffering from dementia. Because our government doesn't think in the long term. It can only think as far as the next election, and really doesn't think at all, in my view. So we
And
can't
so you're
expect any
basically
sense
saying
out of
people
them.
should be whipped, which I agree with, right? For not being, having sex outside marriage. So yes, government can impose that fear, but until then, and for all the things that we can get away with that government can't see us doing, secretly having sex outside marriage, all that kind of stuff, would you say First of all, let's break it down. Do you think belief in God is a natural and reasonable, the most reasonable belief, and you have to have a lot of faith not to believe in God? That's one question for you, Claire.
Well, if you were to explain to a child that, you know, you're going out for a bit, and then you explain God, you can't see God, but he's, you know, he sees and knows all, and knows your heart and your mind, and will know if you do something wrong that your conscience tells you is wrong. And to do wrong is to go against the rules, whatever they are. Then you've got God in the mind of the child, probably for the rest of its life, just by saying that. And you know, unless that belief is erased by going to, you know, some state school that wants the child not to believe in God.
Okay. Let me, because I'm not gonna. Yeah, I'll ask AJ. Do you think I'll ask AJ the same question, then maybe come to the fear of God as a useful psychological tool afterwards. Do you think belief in God is a natural, reasonable belief, and it takes a huge leap of faith to believe there's no creator?
I would say it's natural in the sense that we can see, for example, belief in deities or gods in indigenous tribes that have had no contact with the outside world or the rest of civilization. We can see from archaeology, cave paintings, etc., that it's in our nature to be mythical creatures, to ascribe narratives to things that happen around us. Why does it rain? Or why does it thunder? Because the sky god is angry and we need to appease, and to sort of construct narratives and explanations for why things happen in the world around us. It's what makes Homo sapiens, on the one hand, quite clever,
You
and we
suggested the
survived.
least plausible or silly kind of narratives. I'm talking about the most sensible kind of narratives, like the narrative for the creation of this phone. Okay, is that although I didn't see it created, I created a narrative that there was a factory, and I think that's quite a reasonable narrative. Let's try to steel man the case for the narratives, let's say, because straw mans are not very useful, right? So a
I
steel
wasn't
man.
stillmaning it. I think that's just it's a fact that this is what we observe when we look at
Now, I'm saying in terms
ethnosciences,
of
when we
the
look at
useful narratives,
archaeology.
a narrative for believing in God would be I don't see any examples of complex things forming by themselves in my day-to-day lives, like the phone, whatever. I have a narrative in my head that says there was a factory that made this phone. And so I should have a reasonable narrative that says things are far more complicated, like us. Or the narrative would be that there was a creator. Do you think that's a reasonable narrative?
Yes, yeah. As I say, if our everyday experiences are all that we go to, our anecdotal experiences, it's natural to try and ascribe narratives and causations for things. That's what I was getting to. It's a human psychological fact that this happens. That's why I use the example of prehistory or use the example of indigenous tribes, because they don't have like the media propaganda society that we have in the sort of the natural state. We do have that aspect of our intelligence, of our cognition. That's natural. But then, in terms of the example, the analogy of the phone, again, if your everyday experience, for example, you happen to be an evolutionary biologist and you go to the lab and you observe that actually amino acids in the solution that replicates the early Earth, can they form by themselves, and can they associate, and can small molecules form complex ones kind of spontaneously? Yes. So if your daily experience includes that, then you might think twice about whether
I would
complex
say that
things
that
can be
doesn't
formed.
happen. So there's a lot of debates on
That's
that.
been observed. It's been observed and documented like 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So that's one thing to say. Another thing to say is an understanding of how evolution happened. If the belief is, or if the understanding is, it's kind of like rolling a dice, like on the molecular level. And like, there was a dice rolled, whatever it was, 1 billion years ago. And then 100 million times there was a dice rolled every single time. And then the DNA molecules kind of somehow came together as a result of 1 million dice rolls. If that's your understanding, that's incorrect. That's not what's being proposed. It's not, because one dice roll doesn't affect the next dice roll. They're independent events. in probability, whereas how DNA formed and how life formed are dependent events. One influenced the other. So it's not like, you know, you throw a dice, it's 1 out of 6, times that by 1,000,000, how, you know, vanishingly small the probability will be, like you winning the lottery. That's not the understanding. So we have to have, I think, a more accurate understanding of what
I would say that's an accurate understanding of evolution, because people always claim
I
there's a
disagree.
different or better. Yeah. So we would disagree, but I would just quickly describe, for purpose of this debate without getting into too much, the idea that evolution or survival of the fittest is a useful creative technique is really bad. It's basically a sledgehammer technique. Okay, essentially, it's far more like, because the sledgehammer technique suggests basically you have, if you get something wrong, it dies. Bang. That's how you create. Like, you're creating things with a sledgehammer. You're like, this doesn't survive. Bang, it's dead. Right. And in that case, what for every mutation that steps forward, because there's more likely, and this is a scientific idea based on entropy, right? There's more chances of something going wrong than right. Every step forward should be followed by 1,000 or 1,000,000 steps backward, because, you know, you're more likely to get things wrong in evolution than right. So, but you can counter that if you want to say, well, I won't really counter it again, but I would just say evolution.
I just say that's what we observe. The species that don't exist, the species that have gone extinct, are way, way more. The species that have failed or that have been squashed by your sledgehammer in your analogy, way, way outnumber the species that have survived. So we do see that.
Cool. I won't keep repeating that idea, but okay, cool. So then I want to get back to this idea of, so it might be hard to go forward, but it's fine. I think again, through our experience, we have no example where you have complex things being created. I think there might be these examples of amino acids that split and create something that's not really anything useful, but maybe they split into something.
You should look at that. I mean, I understand that I told you something that you didn't know. You didn't know that had been observed in test conditions, like in
I've studied
yeah.
fair amount on that. So as far as I'm aware, whatever has happened is non-consequential, not of any, nothing towards anything complex. And I've watched videos and debates and all this kind of stuff as well. But I'll have a look again. Yeah,
because the idea is that if we recreate the early Earth conditions and complex molecules can self-form and associate abiogenesis that has been observed, that's actually quite a significant point that we should appreciate. We can't just sweep that aside.
I'm saying that claim what you're making is inaccurate, because I've looked into it.
So you're saying that I'm wrong in that it's not been observed. That we can easily check that. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Sure. So we'll put references, and people can look into it, and they can make their own judgments and things like that. And I'll put some other references as well, and videos and whatever. But I would say it's very easy to judge because it's unreasonable. Like, we don't have that experience in our day-to-day lives, so it's unreasonable to believe that things form. So just to make kind of the next point of fear of God as a really useful tool, and also where I'm getting my ideas from are based on another verse of the Quran. I don't know if you know, because I really do like discussing this with you, AJ, and maybe you might be aware of it, Claire. There's a verse of the Quran that says, we created you from a drop of sperm, and lo, you are a open disputer. Ever heard of a verse like that, AJ?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Let me quote it more accurately, or I'll read it out from a translation. I think it's the nature of us disputing silly things, essentially, I would describe it as. So there's a verse of the Quran that says, and he, that is God, created man from a mere drop of fluid, but lo, he is an open disputer. So there's the Quran is very poetical, and you can kind of understand different things from it. But this is what I understand from it, that we're so insignificant, yet we have so much pride, and I would say we're so sure of this thing that God doesn't exist, despite the obvious reality that we see every day. Like things don't make themselves, things don't create themselves. Spinoza's God is completely ridiculous. Like, the universe created itself and stuff like that. And I don't think Einstein believed that anyway. So we convince ourselves of that. Our nature is to convince ourselves of ridiculous things, of argue ridiculous things. And I would say the only way to overcome that, and this is also based on another verse of the Quran, is fear of God, like using this psychological tool of an awareness of God, that you are going to meet God. There is a God. God has coded into us this conscience that is reminding us for a reason, so we shouldn't ignore that divine program created in all of us. And that tool helps us save ourselves from our bad choices. Like not getting married, that's going to be really bad for you. Like you're going to be old and lonely. Your friends are going to be dead by the time you're old. When you need them, nothing. Blood is thicker than water, as they say. Friends aren't comparable to actual relatives. So yeah, so the question is Claire, and then AJ, is fear of God a really useful tool to stop us from deluding ourselves? I suppose I'll put it that way.
Yes, I think the role of religion is really to frighten people in their 20s to marry each other before having sex and children. I mean, that's really, the main purpose of religion, in my view. I mean, yes, there are all the other, frills and extras, but that is its real purpose, in my humble opinion.
Cool. AJ?
And even if you don't believe in it,
sorry.
the people around you who do will push you towards marriage and children.
Yes, sort of. What do they call it? Cultural norms? Or not cultural norms. There's something stronger than
Pressure,
social pressure, and all these
peer
other kind of
pressure.
words. Peer pressure. There's something else, but anyway, it's when you feel the pressure. People often think, especially in our Western societies who value liberal freedom over everything, even over responsibility and stuff like that. There's a word for it, and you used it recently with me, when in terms of me choosing like my second wife. What was the word? I can't remember what it was, but it's like this. People looking down, and it's a really useful tool because cultures have learnt things over time, and liberals kind of say, oh no, we should be free from all these things, we shouldn't be put under pressure. I think those social pressures have some intelligence in them, for people who haven't thought things through. So yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so AJ, I mean, how do I put this? So you're saying probably God doesn't exist. I suppose my question is, okay, before I ask the question, did you not say at some point, but you can tell me if I misunderstood, that you're open to becoming a Muslim even, possibly?
If I was given evidence, sure, yeah.
Okay.
That's got a good quality evidence that God exists, sure.
Right.
I mean, I know many secular Muslims, as is, there'll be Muslims for the cultural reasons and other, like, Sufism and the poetry and so on. But actually, whether they really believe inside, who knows? Or maybe they're unsure, they're wavering. So I think, what is the goal of Islam? What is the goal of the Quran? I would say what the Quran itself says, it's taqwa. The goal of Islam is not monotheism.
And taqwa for people. Would you like to describe taqwa for people?
Righteous,
Not righteousness.
righteous conduct. Yeah, righteousness, righteous conduct, living well and being kind. See, when you say God in this whole discussion, I have no problem using the word God. Like I said, unlike many other of my colleagues, humanist atheist colleagues, when you say God, to me, I just hear unity. I hear kindness, I hear love, I hear the cosmos, I hear a humility in front of the awe and the majesty of the universe. And none of that requires believing in an intimate, interdimensional being in another universe that's kind of like causes miracles and judges me for eating bacon if I'm Jewish or Muslim, etc. So that's why I don't believe in that supernatural being, but I take second place to no one in my ability to be humbled, to be moved to tears by the beauty and the awe, the majesty of the universe, of creation, if you want to call it that. And I have no problem using the word God, but I just like to define it when I'm actually before the discussion. And I point approvingly towards people like Spinoza and Einstein more appropriately, but in that vein, people who use God, even Carl Sagan, in ways that do enrich human life and society and the experience. And yes, part of that is finding. So if you're kind, if you value unity, if you're willing to compromise, if you're an attraction towards beauty, not just physical beauty on the outside, but inside, all of these traits, I think generally, but definitely for me personally, is what I look for in a partner, is what I look for in a friend, in anyone. So yes, that does make you more marriageable in that sense, whether or not you use the word God or whether or not you believe in a supernatural being. I think the important part, as the Quran says, is taqwa. However you get there, the end, the journey, the destination is taqwa. So whether you get there because you have to believe in a supernatural being, or if you get there just by being a naturalist, that's fine. But the point is to live in righteousness. The point is not to believe in God, and the point is not to worship God. The Quran says, worship God so that you may be righteous, which is one of my favorite verses. So it's not, the worship of God is not the end destination. It's the means by which we arrive at, human civilization, a goal of righteousness.
Sure, I agree. Yeah, because the word, I don't want to go all technical, but I think you might know this, AJ, because you do seem to know a lot. The word worship is actually ibadah, and ibadah is a transformative tool. Yeah, so yeah, I agree. It's a tool to get you somewhere. Anyway, so I'm not sure if it's worth asking you this particular question. I'm not sure, but I like to be surprised and whatever. But do you think, AJ, fear of God is a useful tool to snap us out of our tendency as human beings to be forgetful? Because in the Arabic word for insan, or human beings, is one of the connotations is to forget. We forget fundamental things like we're going to die, So do you think fear of God could be a useful tool?
Yeah, certainly. Again, in my translation, fear of disunity, fear of losing love, fear of disorder, and fear of inconsequentiality, fear of nihilism. I think these things are excellent motivators. Fear of death are excellent motivators to value the life that we have, to not take for granted the people, the experiences that we have, and to find meanings of life and construct them for us. I don't believe atheism or humanism is synonymous with nihilism, or synonymous with having no purpose, or just shrugging at the universe, or just having endless kind of wispy philosophies and that disappear into the ether. No, I think actually, as for example, the number of humanist marriages shows, as for example, just the anecdotal evidence of millions of people having very, very happy, fruitful, productive lives without believing in God. That shows that the common factor is not belief in God or belief in God or not. It's these other things. It's living in righteousness. Are we actually making the most of life?
Cool. Okay, so as usual, we're behind on time, so I'm just going to throw an idea out there. As usual, my ideas are quite maybe shocking to the average liberal, but it's continuing from the reflections on the first verse I quoted, and it's something like this. So the question is, Claire's got these 4 questions, and the third question is how to be lovable. Obviously, that's key to any marriage. I think there's actually a functional way of looking at it, and the functional way referring to this verse is that for men to give and women to be willing to take what they give. So there's the physical element of the sperm, whatever, but there's more of that. There's kind of also the leadership. For example, men are leaders and women are good at developing what men give. So for example, I would say women are generally chaotic in thinking, and men bring that kind of calm wisdom, but there's many examples of, I think one of the reasons why there's so many women converts to Islam is because they marry a man, they fall in love with that man, and they listen to that man's wisdom, that calm wisdom, and then they develop that and grow that through their children and spread it with their friends in a more maybe calm and thoughtful and caring way than a man can. So I think there's always kind of, let's say, I would describe it as sort of a mirror between the physical and spiritual world. So there's in the physical world, men give their sperm and women grow a baby through that sperm, right? Okay, and they develop it and creating something beautiful. In the same ways, women are very good at spiritual things. They take on spiritual ideas, but they're a bit more chaotic in logically explaining it, but they're very good at adopting spiritual ideas. They're more sensitive to spiritual ideas. So I think there's an element, and so the point of that, so what I'm trying to summarize or trying to say here is to be lovable is to fulfill your roles, your spiritual roles. And the spiritual roles are men give, women take. And that if like, for example, men need to be leaders, but if women nowadays are refusing to obey, they're basically going crazy and doing whatever they're doing, and nobody even wants to marry them. That's why you have these passport bros, people going to the other side of the world to get married, because women are so unmarriageable at the moment. And also men become unmarriageable because they lost their masculinity and understanding of their role as leaders. So those are some thoughts. We're going to totally fail at meeting 8 o'clock, but let's go do this round. And then if AJ wants to leave at 8 o'clock, because I'm sure he's very busy, always doing so many amazing things, he can. But can we quickly do a cycle on?
I've got time.
So let's go. Are you okay with time? You can.
I'm okay with
AJ.
time.
Cool. So Claire, we'll keep going around in circles. So to be lovable is to fulfill your roles, men as leaders, women as takers, and developers. What do you think about that?
You're asking me about how to be lovable? Is that your question?
I think there's a functional way of being lovable. So one way of being unlovable is the modern Western woman, and she's so disagreeable, refuses to take leadership from men. That makes you unlovable, so unlovable that Western men don't want to marry Western women anymore. I mean, I think you're aware of those kind of things, right?
Yes. So
to be lovable would be to be feminine, to accept leadership from a man.
Gender roles. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Men and women should perform their gender roles in order to get themselves a better spouse. And the reason why people now refuse to perform their gender roles is that they are not even thinking of getting married, and they just don't see why they have to, perform those roles.
But one of the reasons why they're not getting married is because their parents were such a bad example that they see, oh my God, our parents were so rubbish and it was so terrible, and people are all fighting. And the reason why they're fighting is because they were not playing their part. Like the spanner was trying to be a hammer or something. I don't know. Everybody was not playing their genetic, natural, spiritual roles. And so, so do you see the value in that particular set of arrangements that men lead, women take?
Well, yes, religion gives people that, the incentive to perform their gender roles, because religion expects people to marry before having children and sex. And therefore, once you are on that kind of conveyor belt thing, you would just naturally perform your gender roles if you're kind of programmed to want to marry before having children. But if you're an atheist, you just wouldn't see the point of it. And would be, of the school of marriage is just a piece of paper, kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. AJ, what do you think?
We're answering the question of how to be lovable and
so 2 parts always is like, do you agree? What do you think about what I said about being lovable is naturally comes from playing your natural spiritual role according to religion, okay, which is a very patriarchal setup. What do you think about that, first of all? And then you can share what you think makes people lovable. So 2 parts, please.
Yeah, I would say there's not one general rule that applies to all situations. And again, whether we are living in a state of nature or not is questionable. We do so many things, contraception, healthcare, that is not in the natural order of things. Naturally, you probably have a life expectancy of about 30, 40 years. That's how long people were living before. We do so many things that are artificial, so living in a state of fitra and a state of nature is questionable, whether that actually is the natural state. In terms of being, men being leaders by default, I don't think the Quran says that. I don't think really that's I don't see the evidence for that. There's
we looked at the verse. We've looked at a
Sorry?
verse, haven't we, in the Quran class, where it does talk about that
Men
you
are
must be.
degree above women, being protectors and providers. That one?
I mean, you know that verse, isn't it? At least, AJ.
Yes, yeah. And I can understand how that would be true in 7th century Arabia, but I don't think that's the Quran is saying that needs to be the case for all time.
Okay,
Again, there are some things that are contextual in the Quran, and there are some things that are eternal and that are universal. And I think we have to, as the Quran says, think and reflect and use history and context wisely, so we don't apply the standards and the mores of 7th century Arabia to 2024. I don't think that's logical, and I don't think that's a reasonable way to approach something like the Quran. It does have eternal messages, but those eternal messages are often not on the surface. So in terms of we do know that cognitively there are some small differences between the way that females and males think and their sort of skills, but it's very on the surface. Again, we don't, speaking as a neuroscience student, as a neuropsychology student, it's very on the surface. I don't think, similar to the social sciences stats we were saying earlier, we can't make any definitive conclusions about what emotional things men are better at than women in all cases. I think it stands to reason to be aware of our cognitive biases as human beings, and in each marriage, in each relationship, work out on a case-by-case basis how best to have a loving, supportive relationship, who should do the majority of the work, what the division of labor should be, etc., etc. And again, I would just say we can't ignore the anecdotal evidence of very healthy, very happy, long-standing marriages between women, gay marriages between people who cohabit but never got married. So all of we have to explain this. We can't are we just saying that that's happening by accident, or are we only picking and choosing what we want to look at, which is the good things that happen when God is involved in the marriage and there is a religious marriage? We have to look.
So when you look at
evidence,
these, obviously because we're going over time, but the examples you're giving, then do you agree that they're not the most common? They're like, for example, lesbian marriages, long-term lesbian marriages, because I would say from my studies that what's it called? Homosexual relationships last the least statistically.
Do they? Okay, I've not looked at the figures on that, but I'll be interested to follow it up. Yeah, I can imagine a world where that's true, and for the purpose of this discussion, I'm happy to assume that it's true. Again, we have to look at why is that the case? Is that, first of all, homosexuality is a minority in Homo sapiens generally, and it's a minority, so we'd expect the claim isn't that lesbian marriage is the majority. That wasn't the claim that I was making. I was making, how can we explain, given that the proposal is this kind of godless marriage is so fraught with difficulties, how can millions of lesbian couples be happy? Are they in an illusion, or how does that actually happen? So we have to look at that. Is that by accident, or are they all teetering on the cliff of about to fall into disaster? So we have to question why that's the case. If we are making this case that God is an essential ingredient and religion is an essential ingredient in marriage, what about those 9,000 humanist marriages in Scotland that happened in 2022? How are they happening? So if we have a theory, it has to explain both the data that fit your argument and also the data that don't. So we have to look at both.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Where are we? So the last thing is how to make the government help you marriageable and stay married. And continuing in the kind of theme of raising children, the theme, governed by the first verse I quoted, I would say that if government was going to do anything, and I always give different suggestions each episode, and this one's going to be about helping, creating play areas for children up to 5 years old. And why up to 5 years old? Because I recently watched a video that talks about a study on. So the professor from Harvard who was talking about it was a person who's conducted the longest study of happiness on particular individuals or something. I can't remember, intergenerational study or something on happiness. Anyway, so he was referring to this, that the greatest ROI, return on investment, or in society is if, and I've linked, a reference to the paper that he was referring to, that is that if you take care of those children, if you if you invest in those children so they grow up healthy, I can't remember what the exact words was, but invest in them essentially, that has the greatest effect on society. And I can understand that because it is when you're at your youngest, you're most malleable. Your brain is still developing. There's so much happening, and maybe therefore you can have the greatest effect. And so, in short, and to make it simple, I would say a key governmental role is to help make it easy to raise children. For example, having more communal, safe play areas. What do you think, Claire, about that idea? And
Well,
then
we'll
you can
just
give me an alternative.
privilege married parents. That would be a start. But yes, I mean, we can do all these, little exercises at the expense of taxpayers. But privileging married parents costs nothing at all.
What do you mean by privileging? Because I'd consider privileging married parents by giving free play areas, really nice play areas, safe play areas, high quality play areas where kids can play with each other. That's a great privilege. I love that privilege.
Yeah, but
what were you thinking of?
Can the children of unmarried parents muscle in on this lovely, scenario that you have? Are you going to exclude them? Are we going to make the moral distinction, or just?
That would be interesting. I don't know. I maybe I would let them in, but you can say whatever you want. So go on.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying the quickest way to ram the point home is to say we're going to privilege married parents over non-parents, and unmarried parents will be treated as sex offenders, according to chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran.
In that case,
and then everybody will get it. The penny will drop, and the people will adjust their behavior accordingly to avoid punishment and to get the status of being, the most privileged group in society.
Yeah, although I'm not into forcing any particular idea, I do like the word of ostracizing, the idea of ostracizing, making people feel crap about doing something stupid. And I think there are a lot of selfish women who've left marriages for short-term gains and stuff like that. And maybe it's helpful to make them realize they should be married because it's better for the children. So those are my thoughts. So I think you convinced me a bit more, Claire. AJ?
Yeah, I agree. I think investment in that age and that part of society, it is a great ROI. I was looking at some figures from the US that says it's a 4 times return on investment. So every dollar invested in, say, the Head Start program, early childcare, etc., will give back $4 later in savings and things like this, and having to counseling, all of that, get all of that together, poverty, food stamps, etc. So yeah, certainly, if you look at where the commonly regarded happiest countries, most developed countries in the world, they regularly do also correlate with with high investment in childcare, free childcare. France has it, Sweden, Finland, Norway, etc. And or where they have a family situation, for example, like in Japan, where they can have multi-generational households, which we've discussed before, and that allows for childcare to be taken care of either privately in the home or which is provided for by the state. So yeah, I'm 100% with you there. I think investment in that does need to take place. I would disagree with obviously separating it and demarcating it and making it a tiered approach based on whether you're married or not, or whether you have that piece of paper or not. As we said before, marriage is more than just a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper, it's a ritual ceremony, and also it's a spiritual, psychological, religious relationship. So, and there are plenty of examples of couples who are cohabiting, married, but only in name, etc., who have very happy lives and families and children. So it needs to be provided for equally. But ultimately, I'm a Democrat. I believe in, if we can convince whatever the democratic decision is, and the UK, if it decides to adopt it, I'll follow it and I'll play my part in that as a democratic citizen.
Cool. And now just a final roundup. I'd like to have the last word. So I'm going to start with Claire. Just your last thoughts, then AJ, then myself.
Yes, AJ talking about his humanist group. Did you say 9,000 couples or something? Was it?
9,000 humanist marriages in Scotland in 2022, and all other faith marriages were 8,000.
Oh, so you're saying that humanists are now the majority in Scotland? That's your point, is it?
In 2022, those are the figures, yeah.
So, I mean, I would say that if you put humanists in one part of the world with resources, and then you put say Muslims in identical circumstances with the same amount of resources, I think it will become obvious which group, side by side with each other, I should say, which group will eventually dominate the other, because of demographics. And it has been said that demographics is destiny. And I invite any listeners to consider that scenario, because obviously one group will be going forth and multiplying within wedlock, and the other lot will just be dying childless, gay, and transgender. And so
cool.
It's just a prediction.
Sure. I'm trying not to comment anymore because I'm trying to wind up. So AJ, your last thoughts?
Thanks, Scarlett, and thanks, Claire, for the time today. Yeah, I think being worried about the generational problem, demographics, the ticking time bomb that is, many countries are worried about it. How are we going to take care of our elderly population? These are certainly, and as part of that, marriage and relationships, and it's a key part of being happy. To be human, a key part of that is relationships. So it's definitely good to focus on it. But let's also, in Maslow's hierarchy, let's also look at things like food, shelter, wages, mental health. A quarter of the UK children live in poverty. What does that do? So let's forget transgenderism and things like this and all of the influence of woke culture. Sure, they may have an input, but you know what has even more of an input? Whether I don't know if I can have the roof over my head for the next year because renting is so crazy, or I don't know whether my wages will be able to be enough for me to afford the essentials. Internet, food, water, gas, etc. This, I think, again, if we talk about what the government's priority should be, I think providing all of those and then comparing, okay, well, is there a need for humanists to have more or less children than other marriages and other faith and belief systems? I would say that could be a better way to approach it. So it's a good thing to be concerned about, but I think let's look at the facts and let's not be sort of blinded and get into a tunnel vision of only focusing on the culture wars, because there are very, very real realities in our hierarchy of human needs that are not being met by our current civilization.
Great, yeah, some very interesting thoughts. I agree with a lot of them. So just to wind up my ideas. So first of all, I've suggested many things on behalf, like that governments should do. For example, in the Quran, it talks about the 4 basic rights of water, food, shelter, and clothing, and that would help against capitalistic slavery and low wages and all this kind of stuff, and that certainly helps. But I don't think it's not stopping a lot of poor people. There's a lot of poor countries which have a lot of children, even Muslims in the same countries where people struggle, to pay rent. The same Muslims have more children. So, or same religious people have more children. So I would say that's not a pivotal thing or factor, that how much money people have, because statistically it's usually poorer people that have more children, interestingly. So that's an interesting psychological thought there. But to wind up my last thoughts, which is a simple thought, which is, I would say, from all the statistics and all the examples I'm aware of, this humanist idea of more marriages, I don't know how well those marriages work, but in terms of having children, it's always been people who are to be described as godly. Why is that? Because being godly gives you the long-term view of things and gives you the subtle value in things that in a materialistic short-term view of life doesn't afford you. So thinking God told you to do it, there's probably some wisdom in it, but the wisdom, when you reflect on it a little bit, is that you'll be happier and less lonely when surrounded by your own children rather than depending on strangers who might be friends or might be dead by then. So those are kind of my thoughts. Just to finalize, thank you so much, both of you. Really interesting discussions, really interesting people, both of you, Claire and AJ. Far from normal people, I would say, right? So you got an atheist who runs a Quran class, you got an agnostic who's supporting Sharia in the West. So, and I love people who are far from normal. So I love that. That's a compliment. And the last word I like to say is this is not an academic debate. I've got plenty of better things to do. It's in the hope that 1 or 2 people might change their lives and not end up lonely. Be married because it's actually more healthy. That's how I feel about things. Thank you so much for your time. All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you. So I'll just end the stream, but you can say anything you want after.